In this heart-wrenching tale, Max's peaceful morning run takes an unexpected turn when he hears a faint whimper coming from behind the pristine walls of a billionaire's estate. His instincts guide him to a German shepherd, chained and broken, shivering in fear. As Max watches from the shadows, the chilling reality of the dog's suffering becomes clear. This isn't just any dog, this is Louis, a hero from Max's past. The very dog who once saved his life in a desert raid. Max's decision to act will lead to a dramatic confrontation, but will it be enough to save Louis from a cruel fate? Watch now to uncover the shocking twists that follow and see how an unbreakable bond between man and dog leads to an unforgettable fight for freedom. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow their journey. A pale layer of fog still covered La Jolla when Max began his morning run. The cliffs rested quiet above the water, and the streets felt empty in a calming way. His breath warmed the cool air as he settled into a steady pace. It should have been an ordinary start to the day, simple and quiet. Then a sharp metal clank sliced through the haze. A faint whimper followed, the kind of sound that climbed under the skin and stayed there. It carried a strain that felt close to desperation. Max slowed. His instincts shifted in an instant. Old training returned like muscle memory waking from sleep. He listened hard. The sound came again, thin yet urgent, drifting from the direction of Chris Langford's estate, a place known for expensive walls and strict privacy. He stepped off the running path and moved toward the tall fence surrounding the property. Each step grew heavier. His pulse pushed against his ribs as the fog swirled under the dim morning light. The calm of the neighborhood faded while a quiet tension rose inside him. Max reached the fence and rested one hand on the cold metal bars. He leaned in and listened. Another clank, another soft cry. The kind of sound that came from a living creature pushed past its limit. He scanned the grounds through narrow gaps between the bars. Perfect lawn, clean stone. A still yard with the air of untouched wealth. Yet something hidden disturbed the calm, like pain trapped behind a polished mask. Max moved along the fence until he found a dense line of hedges shaped into a tall green wall. He pushed through a small opening between the branches. Leaves brushed his shoulders as he lowered himself closer to the ground for a better view. Through the thin fog, a shape appeared near a concrete post at the back of the yard. Max froze. A German shepherd dog curled against the base of the post. Its body shook with every breath. A chain hung from its collar, heavy and taut. A low whimper drifted across the cold stone patio and reached him through the bushes. Max felt the sound hit him deep. There was fear in it. There was exhaustion. There was something else too. Something that made his chest tighten. He leaned forward for a clearer look. The fog shifted, revealing more of the scene. The German shepherd dog kept its head low, ears flat, ribs visible under thin fur. Every movement looked painful and slow. The chain attached to the collar gleamed in the faint light like a warning. Max held his breath. His heart pounded with the familiar rhythm of danger. The old instinct rose stronger, pushing him to act, pushing him toward the helpless figure in the yard. He stayed still for another moment, eyes fixed on the trembling dog. A soft metallic rattle echoed from deeper inside the estate. Something stirred behind the glass walls of the mansion. A shadow moved across the window. Max pressed closer, his pulse rising. The next moment would reveal the source of the sound. The truth waited behind that shifting shadow, and it would draw him into a fight he never planned to face this morning. The fog thinned again, and the shadow grew sharper. The glow from Chris Langford's mansion spread across the yard with a cold, sharp edge. It looked clean and perfect from afar, yet the light held a chill that reached deeper than the fog. Behind the tall windows, a darker shape shifted. A presence moved with a calm that felt practiced and cruel. Max stayed low behind the hedge. His breath came slow and steady as he leaned forward to to study the figure more clearly. The fog thinned just enough for him to see a man step into view. Chris held a metal bucket in one hand and a wooden stick in the other. His silk robe dragged across the stone patio with a smooth glide that felt out of place beside the trembling German Shepherd dog. Chris paused near the post where the dog lay. He lifted the bucket and slammed it against the concrete. The sharp clang rang through the silent yard. The dog flinched hard, its body curling inward as if bracing for impact. Chris raised the wooden stick and tapped it against his palm with a calm rhythm. There was no rush in his motion, only a slow, steady confidence that carried something dark. Max tightened his grip on the branch beside him. His pulse beat harder. The scene felt wrong in every way. The yard was perfect. The air was still. Yet here stood a man treating a living creature with cold precision. Max pressed deeper into the hedge, trying to keep hidden while still holding the dog in sight. Chris stepped closer. His voice traveled across the patio, smooth yet sharp. He spoke to the dog in a tone that sounded almost casual, as if he addressed an object instead of a living soul. The German Shepherd dog tried to rise but fell back to the ground. Its legs shook under its thin frame. Each breath came shallow. Chris lifted the bucket again and struck the ground beside the dog. Another loud clang filled the air. The dog whimpered and pressed its body tighter against the post. Chris watched with a slight tilt of his head, almost curious. He tapped the stick against his knee, then lowered it toward the dog. The stick struck the stone once more, and the sound echoed across the patio. Max felt heat rise in his chest, his jaw tightened. A wave of anger pushed through him, steady and strong. The scene pulled him back toward memories he worked hard to bury. He had seen people break under fear. He had seen animals pushed past their limits. The sight of it here, in a quiet California yard, shook him more than he expected. He studied Chris with sharp focus. The man looked calm, collected, untouched by any sense of mercy. The bucket gleamed under the patio light. The wooden stick rested ready in his hand. His posture held power and control with a chilling ease. Chris moved the bucket again. The German Shepherd dog lifted its head for a brief moment as if searching for a breath of safety. The fog shifted in that exact second, clearing a narrow line of sight. Max froze. A long scar ran along the dog's leg, pale against the thin fur. The sight hit Max like a strike to the chest. The shape of it, the angle, the memory that rushed forward. He knew this mark. It belonged to a dog he had once trusted with his life, a partner in the desert, a soul that carried courage through fire and dust. The German Shepherd dog lowered its head again, shaking with fear. Max's breath stalled as truth pressed in on him. The scar linked the present to a past he never forgot, and it was about to pull him into a fight he could no longer walk away from. Some scars fade. Some stay bright through the years. A few return at the exact moment when a life is ready to change. Max stared through the thinning fog, his breath held tight in his chest. The pale line on the German Shepherd dog's leg pulled a memory from deep inside him, a memory buried under sand, fire, and loss. He leaned closer, eyes locked on that single mark. The shape, the length, the angle that curved across the thin fur. The truth grew clear with a heavy weight. The German Shepherd dog in the yard was Louis, the same brave partner who once ran beside him across raging wind and rough ground. The same dog the unit had mourned after the chaos of a night raid. Louis had vanished during a mission, and every Marine in that unit had carried that loss for a long time. Max felt the world shift. The yard around him blurred. His vision tunneled toward that single scar, and the present drifted away. A blast of heat flashed through his mind. He was back in the desert. The sky lived in a haze of dust. His squad moved through a narrow pass with caution. Louis stayed at his side, alert and ready. Then the earth shook with a roar. The blast came from the right, bright and violent. Max felt the ground rise, felt his helmet slam into stone, felt sand fill his throat. Everything turned into fire and smoke. He drifted in and out of the moment. The chaos swallowed sound and shape. Then a warm weight pressed against his chest. Louis pushed under Max's arm and dragged him across the dirt. The German shepherd dog gripped his vest with fierce strength, pulling him away from falling debris. Louis saved him through instinct and heart. That memory surged with force. Max felt his chest tighten as he blinked away the vision. His eyes returned to the present, to the fragile dog chained in Chris Langford's yard. Louis trembled with a slow, uneven rhythm. The dog lifted his head again, only for a moment, and those familiar eyes caught a sliver of dim light. Max bit back a sharp breath. He felt a pull deep in his gut, a mix of gratitude and guilt. Louis had given everything once. Now Louis lay broken in a place that carried wealth and cruelty in equal measure. A soft cry rose from Louis's throat. His body swayed and then dropped against the post with a dull thud. Max pressed both hands into the earth without thinking. Every part of him urged forward. His muscles coiled with the urge to jump the fence and charge across the yard. He forced himself to stay still. He watched Louis struggle for a breath. He watched the fog roll in again and swallow part of the patio. His mind raced through each choice. His pulse hit hard with each beat. He pulled back into the shadows, heart heavy and sharp. He whispered through clenched teeth as if Louis might somehow hear through the fog and glass, "I come back for you tonight." The promise settled inside him like steady flame. Max rose from the hedge. The day waited ahead of him, yet his thoughts stayed in this yard, locked on Louis. He stepped away from the fence with a new purpose building in each stride. The next move would shape everything that followed. Some moments leave a person with a single path. Step back and live with regret, or step forward and honor a bond forged through fire. Max walked fast along the quiet road, fog pushing behind him as if urging him toward a decision he already felt deep in his chest. Louis had once carried him through sand and smoke. The memory stayed clear, bright like a flare in the night. Max owed him more than a glance through a fence. He reached his small room above the old garage and pushed the door closed with a firm pull. The space was narrow and worn, yet it held a calm that helped him gather his thoughts. The air carried a mix of dust and sea breeze from the cracked window. Max stood still for a breath, letting the weight of the day settle. He stepped toward the shelf where he kept a few pieces of gear from his Marine years. Basic items, simple, reliable. A small flashlight, a dark hoodie, a pair of gloves, light shoes for quiet movement. He laid each item on the bed in a careful line. Every choice mattered. Every tool carried a purpose. Max sat on the edge of the bed and closed his eyes for a moment. He pictured the layout of Chris Langford's estate, the slope of the yard, the tall windows, the hedge line, the concrete post where Louis lay chained. He replayed each detail in his mind with careful attention, the way he once studied patrol routes along desert ridges. He rose again and spread a sheet of paper across the desk. With sharp strokes, he sketched the yard from memory. He marked the hedge where he hid. He traced the path toward the back fence. He made a line where the patio lights reflected off the glass wall. Each mark carried a steady purpose. His heartbeat slowed as the plan took shape. Max moved around the room with smooth steps, checking his shoes for loose stitching, testing the small flashlight for brightness, pulling the hoodie tight to the shape of his shoulders. The preparation felt like a quiet ritual. He breathed steady. He centered his thoughts. This mission carried no orders and no team, yet it asked for the same focus he once needed on foreign ground. The day slipped toward evening. Street lights flickered on outside, tossing long shadows across the room. Max stood at the window and watched the horizon fade into soft gray. A deep calm settled into his mind, stronger than fear, sharper than doubt. Louis had saved him once. This night belonged to Louis. He stepped back to the desk and folded the paper with the layout. He tucked it under his sleeve for quick access. He pulled on the gloves and slipped the flashlight into his pocket. Every movement held steady control. His focus felt complete, clean, and sharp. When the sky reached full dark, Max left the room and walked toward the estate with quiet, deliberate strides. The fog returned in thin waves, drifting across parked cars and empty sidewalks. A soft hum from a street lamp followed him down the road. He reached the corner near Chris's property and paused behind a large tree. A faint red glow blinked near the top of the fence. A camera. The small light pulsed with a steady rhythm, marking its sweep of the yard. Max lowered his hood and steadied his breath. The next steps would take him across the line between watching and acting, between fear and purpose, between the past he lived and the future he needed to shape. He moved forward, slow and silent, toward the shadowed edge of the estate. Beyond that fence waited a yard of cold stone, a cruel master, and a dog who once carried him through fire. The path ahead grew darker as he stepped closer, ready to slip inside the world Chris believed he controlled. There was no spotlight, there was no team waiting for a signal. It was only Max, the night, and a plan shaped by duty and memory. The air felt thick with quiet intent as he moved along the shadowed fence line. The estate ahead looked calm, but beneath that calm lived a harsh truth he had already seen once. He reached the section of the fence where the red camera light blinked. The glow painted a small circle on the metal bars. Max studied its rhythm with the patience of long nights on foreign ground. When the light swept left, he crouched low. When it swept right, he reached up and touched the wire running along the base of the frame. His fingers moved with measured care. He pulled a thin tool from his pocket. It was simple, light, and meant for quiet work. With a gentle motion, he slipped it beneath the wire and eased it upward. He breathed slow. The camera continued its pattern. The wire clicked into place against the tool. The sensor relaxed. The glow stayed steady. The system believed the fence was untouched. Max lifted the section just enough to slide under. Dirt brushed his gloves as he pulled himself through and rolled into the cover of the hedge inside the yard. He stayed still for a moment while the night settled around him. The fog drifted across the ground like soft smoke. The yard carried the same cold beauty he had seen that morning, yet the darkness revealed sharp edges. The stone patio shone under the soft lights from inside the house. The glass walls reflected faint movement from the hallway. Max lowered his head and moved along the hedge, keeping close to the shadows. He reached the patio and saw the concrete post near the center. Louis lay against it, curled tight into himself. The German shepherd dog shook with slow, uneven breaths. Max stepped closer, his heart tightening at the sight. Louis looked smaller than he remembered, thinner, worn in a way that spoke of long days without comfort. The chain reached from Louis's collar to the post in a heavy line. Max knelt beside it. He pulled the bolt cutter from his hoodie and positioned it at the thick link near the ground. His hands stayed steady. He pressed the handles together with a smooth motion. Metal snapped with a muffled pop under the pressure. Louis flinched and pulled his legs in closer. Max set the cutter aside and lowered his hand toward Louis's shoulder. He moved slow. He kept his voice silent but warm in his breath. Louis trembled, unsure, caught between fear and instinct. Max touched the fur near the scar on Louis's leg. The mark felt familiar under his fingers, a small ridge of memory from a night far from this yard. Louis lifted his head. His eyes found Max through the dim light. For a moment, the fear in them softened into something older, something that carried trust. Louis stared at Max with a look that felt like recognition rising through pain. The moment held steady for a breath, then shifted as a faint sound stirred from inside the house. Lights moved behind the glass. The next minute would decide everything. One breath out of rhythm could end everything. One sound out of place could draw eyes to the yard and turn the night into danger. Max felt the weight of that truth settle on his shoulders as the lights inside the mansion brightened. The glow pushed across the stone patio in sharp bands. Louis tensed at the shift in light, his body curled tight, and a low growl formed deep in his throat. Max reached for him with calm hands. Louis snapped toward the movement, teeth flashing in panic. The fear inside the dog was raw and wild. Max pulled back just enough to keep the moment steady. He kept his voice low and warm. He let the softness in his tone guide the space between them. His hand returned to Louis's shoulder, slow and steady. A door inside the mansion slid open. The sound glided across the yard. Louis jerked. His legs scrambled on the stone. His breath came fast. His eyes showed deep fear that reached past the present and into the nights that had shaped him. Max knew he had only seconds. He leaned forward and wrapped both arms around Louis. The dog twisted with startled force. Max held firm and pressed his hand across Louis's muzzle with gentle strength. Louis shook with fear and confusion. Max kept whispering soft words, a steady stream of calm to match the rising threat outside. Footsteps moved inside the hall. The lights grew brighter on the patio floor. Max pulled Louis into the shadow of the hedge. His back pressed to the cool leaves. The branches covered them in a dark cradle. A lamp flicked on near the sliding door. The warm light covered half the yard. Max pressed Louis tighter against his chest. The dog's breath hit his palm in fast bursts. His heartbeat pulsed hard under thin fur. Max held him through the tremble, feeling a sharp bond rise from memory and need. He stayed still. His breath matched the rhythm of Louis's shaky breaths. The lights shifted again. A figure moved inside, pacing near the window. The shape crossed the glass wall but stayed in the house. Max waited through each second with the focus of a Marine who had walked close to danger before. The steps inside the house grew faint. A door closed deeper in the hall. The lights stayed on, but the shape had left the patio. Max lowered his hand from Louis's muzzle. The dog sagged against him, exhausted from fear and strain. Max pushed an arm under Louis's chest and another under his hind legs. He lifted him with care. Louis's head rested against Max's shoulder with a long, tired breath. The night felt thick again, yet the path to the hedge stayed open. Max tightened his hold and stepped toward the dark corner of the yard. He moved fast but quiet, each step measured and sure. Louis breathed in short bursts against his neck. The sound carried both pain and trust. It guided Max forward. He reached the fence line and lowered Louis enough to slide through the lift he had made earlier. Dirt brushed his gloves. The hedge opened into the narrow path behind the property. Max gripped Louis close and stepped into the deeper fog. The estate fell behind him with each stride. Louis shivered in his arms. Max kept moving, the bond between them growing stronger with each breath. The past waited for them up ahead, rising with the rhythm of memory and pain. Louis lay on the floor of the small room like a fallen warrior. His legs curled tight. His breaths came thin and shaky. Max knelt beside him with both hands pressed gently against Louis's ribs. The dim light from the desk lamp cast a soft glow across the dog's battered frame. Louis's eyes drifted open and closed as if fighting sleep he could not afford. Max kept his voice low. He spoke short words meant to steady Louis the same way he once spoke to wounded friends in desert night. Louis's ear twitched at the sound. His chest rose with effort. Each breath sounded like it carried the weight of sand and pain. Max pulled a towel from the cabinet and placed it under Louis's head. The dog trembled as Max checked the worst wounds, scratches along the shoulder, bruises under the fur, thin cuts near the legs. Louis winced at every touch. Max stayed close, letting a steady presence guide the moment. A sharp knock hit the door. Max tensed for a breath, then opened it with a slow pull. Levi filled the doorway. His presence carried strength shaped by long years of work in harsh places. He stepped inside with calm steps and set his worn medical bag on the floor. Max met his eyes without speaking. Levi placed a hand on Max's shoulder in a familiar gesture. Then he knelt beside Louis. His expression shifted the second he saw the dog's condition. He ran a careful hand along Louis's neck and checked the pulse with slow precision. Louis whimpered, a sound filled with fear and exhaustion. Levi lifted the fur near the collar and studied the skin under the metal band. He felt along the back of the neck. His fingers paused at a small raised spot under the skin. He frowned and reached for a small tool from his bag. He worked with steady focus. A thin piece of metal slipped out from under the fur. It was charred at the edges, twisted by heat. Levi held it between his fingers and studied the damaged surface. His jaw tightened. His shoulders drew firm as he turned the piece over in the light. The metal carried the faint outline of a code once etched with care, a code tied to military service. Levi lifted his gaze to Max. The truth in his expression struck with the force of a heavy blow. Louis once belonged to a program that never marked a dog without reason. Each dog received a chip that held history, duty, and identity. Someone had burned this one to hide that identity forever. Levi drew a slow breath and set the damaged chip on the towel. The air in the room grew heavy with anger and sorrow. Max lowered his head beside Louis's shoulder and whispered soft comfort. Louis's eyes opened for a brief moment. His gaze drifted from Max to Levi, then back again, as if tracking voices that offered safety. Levi pressed a hand against Louis's side to steady him. His voice dropped into a low tone shaped by experience and quiet fury. He turned the damaged chip in his palm, letting the weight of the truth settle across the room. The edge of his voice carried the gravity of a dark discovery as he looked at Max. Whoever did this knew exactly who this dog is. Chris Langford's mansion stood behind tall walls and glass that could stop bullets. Each window gleamed with cold polish, hiding a world shaped by wealth and secrets. The estate felt silent on the outside, yet inside it beat with a sharp energy. Chris valued control more than comfort. He guarded every inch of his property as if it were a kingdom made of fragile pride. He stepped through the wide hallway with a calm pace. His robe trailed behind him as he moved toward the patio door. He reached for the switch beside the frame. Light spilled across the stone floor. His eyes swept the space with a gaze trained to see detail and flaw in the same breath. The chain on the ground caught his attention first. A small pile of metal links rested beside the concrete post. The sight froze him in place. His jaw tightened. The collar lay empty. The shape that once curled against the post had vanished. He walked toward the chain with a steady stride. His eyes stayed sharp. His breath grew thin with rising anger. He lifted the broken link and studied the clean cut along the edge. His grip hardened. Someone had stepped onto his property, touched his possession, and walked away without fear. Chris lowered the chain and moved back into the house. His hand found his phone without hesitation. He tapped the screen once and waited. The line connected with a faint click. Benedict answered with a low voice shaped by old discipline and newer shadows. Chris spoke with a tone that left little room for calm. He explained the situation in short, sharp lines. The dog was gone. The chain was cut. Someone had slipped through a protected yard. Benedict did not interrupt. He listened with full focus. He understood the gravity in Chris's words without needing many details. Chris turned toward the control room and stepped inside. The screens along the wall displayed camera feeds from every angle of the mansion. He pointed toward the footage from the back patio. Benedict watched through the screen as the camera flickered during the moment Max moved through the yard. The angle shifted. Then a brief flash of shadow crossed the edge of the frame. Benedict stood with a calm that felt dangerous. He had once walked beside Max in harsh places where instinct meant survival. He had once trusted Max during long nights that tested loyalty and courage. Those years were far behind him now. His life had shifted toward a world driven by money, influence, and quiet cruelty. Yet the way that Shadow moved stirred something deep in his memory. He replayed the clip. He leaned closer toward the screen. His eyes followed the line of movement. The pattern was familiar. The silence between steps. The pace controlled by breath instead of fear. The outline of a figure passing in and out of the weak light. A slow recognition formed in Benedict's mind, a shape of a truth he wished to ignore. He stepped back from the monitor and exhaled once, steady and controlled. Chris watched him. His voice carried tension and impatience as he asked for an answer. Benedict kept his eyes on the image, studying the faint blur of a hooded figure. Then he spoke with a calm certainty that cut through the room like a blade. "This entry pattern, I know who did it." His gaze stayed on the screen, yet his thoughts drifted toward a man he once trusted and a bond he had long abandoned. The hunt waited just ahead, ready to rise with the coming night. When a hunter once shared your uniform and your trust, escape becomes tight like a closing fist. Max felt that weight long before Benedict made his first move. The city stretched wide around them, yet every street carried a sense of pressure. Louis rested weakly in the passenger seat of Max's old truck, his breaths shallow but steady. Max kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the mirror as the night pressed close along the quiet blocks of San Diego. Benedict acted fast, he always did. He stepped into the task with the same sharp instinct that once guided him through hostile valleys beside Max. He made calls with short commands. His voice traveled through dark phone lines toward people who worked in shadows, private guards, street lookouts, techs who watched cameras for cash. Each one accepted his instruction with quick agreement. They spread across the city like threads of a net pulled tighter with every passing minute. Max drove toward small places where light faded and the streets grew quiet. He knew those places. He knew they offered brief cover, yet never safety. He parked behind a cheap motel at the edge of a forgotten block. The paint peeled from the doors. The sign buzzed with a faint hum. Inside the room, Louis settled on a thin rug while Max locked the door and pulled the curtains together. The air carried the smell of stale carpet and damp walls. Max paced once through the room and tried to settle his breathing. He felt the weight of choices pressing in from every direction. Louis stirred at the sound of his footsteps. Max knelt beside him and offered a soft touch to the dog's shoulder. Louis leaned into the contact with a faint tremble. Time moved fast. Max knew they could not stay in one place. He carried Louis back to the truck and drove again. The fog of the early morning hours wrapped around them as he reached an old garage where he once worked odd jobs. It stood behind a row of empty shops. The windows sat cracked. The roof sagged near the back. Max pushed the door open and stepped inside with Louis held close. The space felt cold, yet quiet enough to offer a few breaths of calm. He placed Louis on a blanket near a stack of old tires. Louis curled his body tight, eyes tracking every shift of sound. Max checked the street through a narrow crack in the wall. His breath tightened each time a car passed. He knew Benedict's methods. A wide net. Many eyes, quiet pressure. Each moment felt like a step deeper into a maze with moving walls. They moved again when the sky reached its darkest hour. Max lifted Louis one more time and stepped through the shadows behind the garage. He kept to alleys and backways until he reached another motel farther from the main roads. This room offered a thin lamp and a shaky bed. Max laid Louis near the wall and dropped onto the edge of the mattress with a long exhale. The room settled into silence for a brief moment. Max studied the door and listened to the distant rumble of a passing truck. He reached down and placed a hand on Louis's back. The dog's breathing slipped into a slow rhythm shaped by exhaustion and trust. Then Louis's ears lifted. A soft shift of air brushed under the door. Footsteps pressed against the walkway outside. Louis tensed, his gaze locked on the door with sharp focus. Max rose from the bed in a single motion as the pressure outside grew stronger, step by step. The hallway stayed quiet, yet the pressure outside felt close and heavy. Max moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside by a small inch. A dim yellow lamp stood above the parking lot, its light spreading across cracked pavement. Two figures walked into that circle of glow with steady steps, their shoulders squared, their heads turned toward the row of doors with clear purpose. Max felt the truth settle in his chest with sharp certainty. They had tracked him. They had reached this place faster than he hoped. Louis pressed his paws against the floor and watched the door with tight focus. His breath came fast through a dry throat. Max lifted Louis with careful arms and moved toward the back exit. The latch gave a soft click when he pulled it open. Cool air rushed in. He slipped into the narrow walkway and stepped into the shadows behind the building. The ground felt damp from the night mist. A cold wind pushed past him as he reached the corner that opened toward the parking lot. The two men moved with trained rhythm. Their steps spread across the concrete in slow patterns. One reached toward his jacket with a smooth motion. Max recognized the intent before the metal flashed. The man drew a gun with practiced confidence. Max shifted to shield Louis. Before he could move again, Louis twisted from his arms with sudden force. Pain and instinct drove the dog forward. Louis hit the ground and pushed himself into a sprint. His legs wobbled, yet his spirit carried him with fierce will. He leapt between Max and the muzzle with a burst of energy shaped by loyalty. A shot cracked through the night. The sound hit the air like a slap of fire. Louis took the impact with his side and rolled across the pavement. Max lunged forward with a rush of fear and grabbed the second man by the collar. He twisted the grip and drove him into the hood of a nearby car. The man dropped hard. Max pinned him with his forearm and struck with sharp force. The man sagged under the weight of the hit. Max turned back toward Louis with a heart shaking inside his chest. Louis pushed himself up with weak legs. His body trembled, yet his eyes held the same fire Max remembered from the desert. Max knelt and gathered Louis close. Warmth and pain spread through his hands as he checked the wound. Louis licked Max's wrist with a soft touch as if offering comfort instead of seeking it. The first man staggered to his feet and stared at Louis with wide eyes. His weapon slid from his hand and clattered onto the pavement. A single whisper escaped him, shaped by shock and disbelief. "Ghost dog, still alive." Max held Louis tighter. The words echoed through his chest with a mix of relief, awe, and rising fear. The truth had begun to spread. Their enemies now understood which warrior they faced. More footsteps approached from the far side of the lot, each one carrying fresh danger. The night around them grew tense, ready to close in once more. A black car glided through the narrow alley behind the motel. Its dark frame moved with slow purpose, the kind of approach that carried intent rather than guesswork. Max watched the headlights sweep across the pavement and felt his stomach tighten. Chris wanted control. He wanted silence. He wanted Louis kept far from any past that could expose him. Max lifted Louis with steady arms and stepped back into the shadows behind the parked cars. Louis pressed his head against Max's shoulder. His breath came weak but steady. Max felt the shake in Louis's body with every small movement. He knew they could not run forever. The night had shown that truth in sharp detail. The black car rolled to a stop. A door opened with a soft thud. Max heard low voices pass between the men who stepped out. They scanned the lot with calm, confident eyes. They held the posture of people who believed this moment would end in their favor. Max stepped deeper behind the dumpster near the rear wall. He placed Louis down for a moment and checked the dog's side with careful hands. Louis let out a soft breath, steadying himself against the cold ground. Max stayed beside him, feeling the weight of the situation press into his thoughts. Running had carried them through hours of danger. Hiding had carried them across alleys and dark corners, yet each move pushed them closer to a dead end. Max understood the truth as clearly as he once understood orders on foreign soil. A single choice waited now. Trapped by danger on both sides, Max faced a line he could not cross again. He lifted his phone with a slow breath. His thumb hovered above the screen. He knew what this call would bring. Exposure. Consequence, a future shaped by hard judgment. Yet he also knew Louis's life held more value than fear. Louis had rescued him once with courage born from duty and instinct. Max felt that same duty rise inside him now. He made the call. The line connected. A calm voice answered from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Max spoke with short, clear words. He explained the injury, the burned chip, the abuse he had witnessed. He gave his location with steady breath and kept his voice shaped by resolve rather than fear. He ended the call and dropped the phone into his pocket. He rested a hand on Louis's back. The dog looked up at him with tired eyes that still carried trust. Max felt a deep ache and a deep strength rise together. He had stepped toward a path that offered no easy return, yet it held the only chance for justice and truth. Moments later, a dark sedan pulled into the lot. It moved with caution, not threat. Max stood and lifted Louis again. The sedan door opened and a woman stepped out. She carried the calm presence of someone trained to measure danger in an instant. Her gaze swept the lot and landed on Max. Before she took a step forward, Louis twisted from Max's arms with surprising force. The dog moved in front of him, planting his paws wide and lifting his head with a shaky but fierce stance. His body wobbled, yet his spirit rose in a clear line of protection. Max reached toward him with a soft touch, but Louis held his ground. His gaze locked on the stranger with the deep instinct of a guardian. The agent paused, reading the moment with care. The path ahead opened toward truth and conflict, with Louis standing as the last barrier between Max and whatever waited in the next breath. Louis stood firm between Max and the agent. His legs shook, yet his spirit held the room with a strength far larger than his injured body. The air inside the small motel space grew tight. The light from the single lamp cast sharp shadows across the floor. The agent watched Louis with calm eyes, her hands held open at her sides. She measured each breath with care, as if the next sound might break the fragile balance. Max stepped forward by a small inch. Louis blocked him with a soft but firm push of his shoulder. The dog kept his gaze locked on the agent. His stance carried a deep message shaped by duty. Max placed a slow hand on Louis's back. The dog eased only by a fraction, enough to show he recognized Max's touch, yet still guarded him with steady focus. The agent introduced herself with a voice shaped by training and understanding. She spoke with slow, warm tones that eased the tension without rushing the moment. She gave her name and explained her purpose. Her words carried no threat, only intent. She observed the way Louis held his ground, and something shifted in her eyes. A small spark of respect formed there. She understood that Louis stood as a warrior, not as evidence. Max spoke with calm breath. He lowered himself beside Louis to show the dog that he trusted the woman in front of them. Louis relaxed enough to let Max guide him a step back. The agent nodded with quiet approval. She walked into the room with gentle pace and closed the door, leaving the tension outside in the night air. Max reached into his pocket and pulled out the device that held the recording from Chris's yard. The video showed the strike of the bucket, the harsh voice, the trembling form of a dog pushed past fear. Max placed the device on the table between them. His hands felt heavy as he released it. He then shared Louis's burn chip and Levi's findings. The agent studied both with sharp attention. Her face remained calm, yet her posture changed. She understood the weight of what she now held. Max explained each part of the night. The cut chain, the chase, the shot in the parking lot, the fear in Louis's eyes. Louis watched Max while he spoke, his breath moving in slow waves. The agent listened without interrupting. Her gaze shifted between Max and Louis with growing focus. When Max finished, silence settled for a long moment. The agent placed the video device beside the damaged chip. Her expression carried a mix of resolve and quiet sadness. She reached out with slow movement and rested her hand near Louis, letting the dog choose the distance. Louis looked at her with clear eyes that held pain and courage. He did not step back. The agent gave a small nod. She understood what he had endured and what he represented. She looked at Max with a steady gaze and spoke with a tone shaped by duty and strategy. "We will need a trap." Those words carried the start of a plan that would pull them toward a place filled with risk and truth, a place where the night would reveal the face of the man who caused this pain. Cold wind swept through the empty harbor as night pressed against the water. Lamps along the docks cast soft yellow circles that flickered with each gust. The world felt stripped down and quiet, ready to hold a meeting shaped by danger. Max stepped onto the wooden planks with steady breath. His hood lay low across his brow, and Louis stayed close at his side, tired but alert. This night carried a purpose that felt heavier than any mission Max had walked before. He would see Chris face to face. He would stand inside a plan built on risk, truth, and sacrifice. The agent had laid out each step with simple clarity. Max would reach out to Chris with a short message. He would offer a chance to buy Louis back. Chris valued control. He valued keeping his secrets buried. A deal like this would pull him toward the harbor without hesitation. The agent and her team would wait in the shadows until the moment revealed its shape. Max stood near the edge of the dock and watched the dark water shift in slow waves. Louis leaned against his leg with quiet trust. Max rested a hand on Louis' shoulder and breathed in the cold air. His mind stayed steady. This was the moment that would decide the path ahead. A deep engine hum approached from the far end of the pier. Headlights cut through the fog in two sharp beams. A large black car rolled toward them with a slow, deliberate pace. The vehicle stopped near the loading area. The doors opened one by one. Chris stepped out first. He wore a dark coat that moved with the wind. His expression carried smooth control and a sense of ownership that felt stronger than the cold air around them. Benedict followed, quiet and focused. His eyes scanned the dock with the skill of a man who once trusted danger more than safety. Two guards stepped out next, tall and firm, hands ready at their sides. The air tightened. Every breath felt thin. Louis shifted his stance and watched the group with sharp eyes. Max placed a steady hand on the dog's neck, grounding them both in the moment. Chris walked closer with a calm stride. He kept his attention locked on Max. His voice carried a quiet command shaped by years of getting what he wanted. Max answered with clear, measured words. He explained that he wanted payment. He explained that he wanted to end this night with distance between them. Chris studied Max with long silence. Then he signaled one guard to step forward. The guard carried a small case, polished and heavy. Its presence pulled the next step of the trap into place. Benedict watched Max with a gaze filled with old memory. He read Max's posture. He read the way Louis pressed close. A shadow of their past moved through his eyes, yet he kept that truth buried. Chris came to a stop only a few steps away. His gaze dropped to Louis with clear displeasure. He tilted his head with a slow, cold motion. His voice turned sharp with disdain. He looked at Louis as if he studied ruined property rather than a living soul who had endured suffering. He lowered his chin and spit on the dock. His words cut through the night with a harsh edge. "It is only damaged goods." Louis lifted his head. His breath drew in deep. A low growl rose from his chest, shaped by memory and pain and strength. His stance tightened with fierce spirit. Max felt the moment shift into a hard line that would break open the next chapter of their fight. The moment Chris stepped forward, the surface of the harbor turned still, as if the sea held its breath. Cold wind brushed across the dock and carried the tension of the night. Max felt each second stretch tight, shaped by danger and truth. Louis stood beside him with wounded strength rising through every shaky breath. Chris lifted his chin, ready to close the distance with the confidence of a man who believed the world bent to his will. His coat pushed back in the breeze as he advanced. The guards shifted into wider stances, prepared for a swift command. Benedict stayed behind them with a steady gaze that held both history and conflict. Chris took another step. Louis stepped first. The German shepherd dog moved in front of Max with fierce intent. His legs trembled, yet his body formed a shield. His head rose high. His breath drew firm. His spirit filled the space with a quiet courage born from battles far from this pier. Chris halted, startled by Louis' sudden strength. His face twisted in clear irritation. He opened his mouth to speak, but the harbor lights shifted. A soft metallic click cut through the air from somewhere beyond the dock. Then the night erupted. Agents surged from between the stacked crates near the boats. Their boots hit the wooden boards in fast rhythm. Their lights cut sharp lines through the darkness. Commands echoed with firm authority. The guards turned in surprise. The smooth control they carried vanished in a flash. An agent reached the nearest guard and locked his wrist with precise strength. The guard fell to the ground under a clean takedown. Another agent moved toward the second guard with swift steps and forced him against the side of the black car. Metal groaned under the impact. Chris spun with shock. His confidence slipped into anger. He shouted at the agents with sharp fury. His voice carried through the cold air, filled with disbelief that his world could fracture in a single instant. He tried to pull back, yet an agent blocked his path. Hands guided him toward the hood of his own car with firm control. Max watched each movement with a breath that felt heavy yet freeing. Louis stayed pressed against his leg. The dog's stance wavered from exhaustion, yet his eyes remained bright with the fire of a loyal fighter. The wind swept past them and carried the scent of the harbor as the chaos settled into a new order. Benedict stood rooted beside the open car door. His face held a long silence shaped by a lifetime of choices. Two agents approached him and secured his wrists with practiced efficiency. He did not fight. He kept his eyes on Max with a gaze that softened for the first time in many years. A single line slipped from his mouth, shaped by regret rather than anger. "I should have followed you." The words drifted across the dock like a final truth between former brothers. Max felt the weight of that line settle in the cold night air. This chapter marked the end of one battle and the beginning of a reckoning that waited far beyond the harbor lights. Morning light filtered through tall windows as Max stepped into the military courtroom. The space felt cold and plain, shaped by rules and duty. Rows of empty benches stretched behind him. There were no familiar faces, no former teammates offering strength beside him. Only the truth he carried and the weight of every decision that had led him here. Louis rested in a quiet room nearby under the care of a medical tech. Max held that thought close to steady his breath. He focused on the panel of officers seated at the front. Their uniforms held clean lines and firm shoulders. Their eyes studied him with patient silence. The charges formed a heavy list across the table: unlawful entry, damage to private property, possession of a living creature tied to federal service. Each charge carved a deep line into the air around him. The consequences hovered like dust in a beam of sunlight. Agent Quinn stood beside a small projector. Her presence carried calm resolve. She held the device that contained the video from Chris's estate. She waited for the signal from the presiding officer. When he gave a short nod, she activated the screen. The room filled with the harsh clang of metal against stone. The image showed Louis curled against the post, body trembling. Chris's voice slid across the space with chilling ease. The officers watched with tight jaws and steady gazes. Quinn moved through the evidence with careful clarity, describing each moment without excess words. When the video ended, Levi stepped forward. He carried the burned chip in a sealed pouch and a folder filled with his findings. His voice held both medical precision and quiet emotion as he explained the damage. He spoke of the intent behind the burn. He spoke of identity erased through cruelty. Louis's history returned in pieces, each one shaped by bravery and loyalty. Max stood straight. His breath rose and fell in a slow rhythm. This room held judgment, yet it also held ears willing to listen. Hope flickered through him, in a thin but steady line. Louis's past had found voice again, and truth now stood under military light. The officers whispered among themselves. Their expressions shifted through thought and calculation. The presiding officer lifted his hand for silence. His gaze turned to Max with a weight shaped by law and humanity. He asked a single question that carried the full gravity of the moment. "Do you have anything to say?" The room grew still, waiting for Max to speak. Max lifted his chin. His voice rose in a clear tone shaped by truth rather than defense. He admitted each action without hesitation. He entered the estate. He cut the chain. He carried Louis across the yard. He fought the men who came after them. He accepted the cost without excuse. The courtroom held steady as his words moved through it in measured lines. His honesty felt like a steady pulse in the quiet space. He explained the moment he recognized Louis, the scar, the memory, the dust in the desert. He spoke of a night when fire tore through the dunes and Louis pushed him from a blast that should have taken his life. His voice softened as he described the courage of a dog that once ran through chaos to save a wounded Marine. He spoke of the fear he saw in Louis under Chris's hand. He spoke of a living being stripped of dignity. His words carried weight shaped by loyalty and loss. He ended with a simple truth. "I did what I had to do because he once kept me alive." Silence filled the room after that line. The officers lowered their eyes to their notes. They talked in low voices. Each exchange moved between rules and compassion. The tension shaped the air as they worked through the conflict between regulation and justice. Max stood without shifting. He held steady. His breath stayed even. His hands stayed still at his sides. He accepted each possible outcome with calm resolve. He did not search for sympathy. He waited for truth. After a long pause, the presiding officer rose. His gaze carried both firmness and respect. His voice reached across the courtroom with measured force. The panel chose a reprimand. The rank stood. The service record stayed intact. The court denied imprisonment. The room exhaled as the ruling settled in place. The decision balanced law and humanity with a steady hand. Relief washed through Max like a warm tide. His shoulders lowered with a slow release. Gratitude rose from deep within him. He offered a silent nod to the officers. He thanked Quinn and Levi with a quiet look that held more meaning than words could shape. Yet the moment offered only partial peace. The presiding officer closed the folder and glanced toward another stack of documents at the corner of the bench. His tone shifted with a new weight. "One more hearing remains. It will determine the future of the German Shepherd dog." The line cut through the air with sharp clarity. Max felt his breath pause for a beat. The fate of the dog who saved his life now waited in the next room. The next chapter would decide if Louis walked into the world with freedom or fell under another rule shaped by fear. The doors opened toward that truth with a heavy pull. The hearing waited ahead. The doors opened with a soft sweep. Louis stepped inside with slow, careful strides. His body still carried healing wounds. His gait showed the strain of long days filled with pain and recovery. Yet his eyes shone with a steady light. He searched the room until he found Max. His tail lifted in a small, hopeful arc. Max felt his chest tighten. The room felt larger now. The walls seemed to stretch with the weight of the decision ahead. The board members sat behind a long table. Their faces carried both empathy and rigid duty. Files stacked before them held Louis' service record, medical reports, and Levi's notes. Each page traced a life marked by service and suffering. The presiding officer cleared his throat. His voice moved across the room in an even tone shaped by protocol. This session will determine the post-service status of the German Shepherd dog. If no qualified caretaker steps forward, regulation directs the dog toward disposal. The word landed like a blow. Max closed his eyes for a brief second. Louis lifted his head at the sound. The dog sensed the shift in tone as if he understood the danger woven into each line. A military handler stepped forward. He crouched at a safe distance and called Louis with clear authority. Louis did not react. His ears twitched, yet his paws stayed rooted where he stood. Another handler tried. He offered treats and soft cues shaped by training. Louis looked toward him, then turned his gaze right back to Max. He did not move even an inch. A psychologist stepped closer and tried a gentler approach. She waited in silence and offered space. Louis watched her with calm eyes, yet no part of him leaned in her direction. His bond rested elsewhere. The room grew still. The board exchanged glances. Each failed attempt raised the stakes. Then the presiding officer turned to Max. "Sergeant, will you call him?" Max stepped forward and dropped to one knee. His voice carried warmth and memory. "Louis, come here, buddy." Louis lifted his head in a sharp, clear motion. His body surged forward with surprising strength. He crossed the room and pressed into Max's chest with full trust. Max wrapped his arms around him with a soft breath that shook at the edges. Every face at the table shifted. Some held awe. Some held quiet emotion. The truth rose in a clear line. Louis chose his person. No command or lure could shift that bond. Louis rested his head under Max's chin. His breath warmed the space between them. His tail thumped once against Max's boot. The presiding officer leaned back. He folded his hands. He looked at the board and then at Max with a gaze shaped by respect and duty. He nodded once. His voice lowered into a tone that carried finality. "We have a decision." The words settled across the room like the pause before a sunrise. The next chapter waited to reveal the future both warrior and dog would walk into together. The officer lifted a document from the stack and placed it at the center of the table. His tone carried the weight of tradition and the softness of honor. Louis is granted honorable discharge, full release from service, custody assigned to Sergeant Max. The line moved through the room like a warm current. Max lowered to both knees without thinking. Louis stepped closer and rested his head against Max's chest. The connection felt deep and steady, shaped by years of fire and memory. Max wrapped his arms around him with a breath that shook through his ribs. His eyes closed for a moment. Gratitude rose inside him in a slow swell. Louis pressed closer. His body trembled, yet his spirit felt strong and clear. The officers gave space for the moment. No one spoke. No one rushed. A quiet respect filled the room. When Max finally rose, Louis followed his movement with steady steps. The leash dangled loose from Max's hand, yet Louis stayed close without any need for command. The bond held true. They walked through the hallway together. The walls carried framed photos of past units and service dogs that once stood beside Marines across distant battlefields. Each picture held a story shaped by courage and sacrifice. Max walked past them with Louis at his heel, feeling the weight and pride of those who came before. Outside, sunlight spread across the parade ground. The air felt clean and open. Young Marines moved through drills in sharp lines. Their voices rose across the field in steady cadence. Max paused at the edge of the steps. Louis sat beside him. The dog's gaze swept across the familiar sights with calm strength. The breeze brushed his fur. The warmth of the sun reached across his back. Freedom felt close enough to touch. Max stepped forward onto the open ground. Louis kept pace beside him. Each step formed a promise. Each breath carried new purpose. When they reached the parking lot, Max opened the passenger door of his truck. Louis waited for a cue. Max nodded once. Louis climbed inside with careful movement, then settled against the seat with a soft sigh. Max smiled at him with a warmth shaped by relief and hope. He closed the door and leaned on the frame for a moment. The engine clicked in cooling metal. The day carried a bright stillness. He looked at Louis through the window. The dog's eyes held trust and a gentle spark. Max opened the driver's door and slid into his seat. He placed a hand on Louis's shoulder. Louis leaned into the touch with a quiet breath. Max spoke with a voice that carried the start of a new chapter. "Now we begin again, Louis." The line settled in the cab like a vow shaped by loyalty and a future waiting to rise. The road ahead stretched toward a place where healing could grow into hope. The next chapter waited at the threshold of a home built for warriors searching for a second chance. The garage behind Max's small house glowed with soft light. The walls once smelled of oil and dust. Now they carried the warm scent of clean blankets, fresh paint, and quiet hope. Old tool benches had become shelves stacked with dog bowls and simple training gear. A row of chairs formed a small circle where veterans sat in steady silence. Louis walked among them with calm steps. His movements were slow yet sure. Each veteran lifted a hand to greet him. Each touch carried the weight of a story shaped by old battles and long nights. Max stood near the door. His gaze moved across the scene with quiet pride. This space once held his loneliness. Now it held purpose. He shaped it for the ones who returned from war with invisible scars. He named it K9 Warriors, a place where humans and dogs could heal together. A Marine in his 40s sat in the corner with his hands clasped tight. His breath came in sharp bursts. His eyes darted across the room as if he searched for a threat that lived only in memory. Louis sensed it. He moved toward the man with a slow pace and lowered his head. The man stiffened. Louis pressed his shoulder against the man's leg in a gentle touch. The Marine exhaled with a shudder. His fingers loosened around Louis's fur. His breath eased. The room softened for him in that moment. Max watched with a full heart. Louis carried the gift he once showed in the desert, a deep instinct for those who needed steady ground. A few minutes later, a woman stepped inside with her young son. The boy stayed close to her leg. His eyes held fear shaped by nights without rest. He scanned the room as if everything might break. Max moved slow and offered them a seat near the shelves. Louis approached with careful steps. He lowered himself onto the rug and rested his chin near the boy's knee. The boy flinched, then paused. Louis stayed still. The boy reached one hand toward the top of Louis's head with a fragile line of trust. His breath softened. Then a small smile rose on his face. His mother pressed a hand to her mouth to hold back her emotion. Max felt warmth spread through his chest. Healing began with moments like this. Evening settled outside. A breeze drifted through the open door. The veterans talked in quiet tones. The dogs rested at their feet. The soft murmur shaped a new kind of brotherhood. Max stepped back and watched Louis cross the room with steady confidence. The dog moved from person to person with a gentle presence. His scars told a story of survival. His spirit offered strength to those who understood pain. Later that week, a local volunteer filmed a short clip of Max and Louis during a training session. The video showed Max guiding Louis toward a veteran during a panic attack. Louis pressed close until the man breathed easier. It showed Max talking about service, loyalty, and finding a way back to life. The clip reached a few screens, then a few more. Within days, it spread across the country. Messages poured in. Veterans, families, strangers who felt hope rise for the first time in years. The garage grew brighter as the world reached toward the story of a Marine and his dog. The next chapter waited at dawn, ready to lift their mission into a wider horizon. The sun rose over Coronado Beach in a wide sweep of gold. The light touched the waves and lit the sand in warm shimmer. Max stepped onto the shore with steady breaths. Louis walked beside him with a strong stride shaped by healing and courage. Their shadows stretched long behind them as the tide pulled in and out with calm rhythm. Max tossed a faded tennis ball across the open sand. Louis charged after it with powerful grace. His paws kicked up small clouds of sand, his ears lifted in the breeze. His body carried the strength he once showed on distant ground. Max felt joy rise inside him as Louis returned with the ball held high in his jaws. Louis dropped it near Max's feet and wagged his tail in a playful arc. They moved along the shoreline in easy rhythm. Max called for a short run. Louis followed with bright energy. Max heard laughter from a nearby family and saw other dogs chase the surf. The world felt gentle again. The morning felt new. Max crouched in the sand. Louis leaned close with warm breath and steady trust. They watched the sunrise together side by side. Max reached out and rested his palm against Louis's neck. "You carried me through fire once," Max said in a soft tone. "Now we carry others." Louis looked at him with calm eyes that held deep understanding. Max felt the truth settle inside him. Their work had only begun. The garage had grown into a refuge. Veterans walked through its doors with heavy hearts and walked out with lighter steps. Louis guided them with a presence that felt almost sacred. Each day offered new moments of healing. Max lifted the ball again and sent it flying across the sand. Louis sprinted with joy, moving faster than Max had seen in months. His legs cut through the wind with free strength. His bark rose clear across the waves. When Louis returned, Max knelt. He pulled Louis close with both arms. A promise formed inside him like a rising tide. "We stand for every warrior who fought their way home," Max whispered. "Man or dog, we stay with them, we guide them, we give them a place to breathe." Louis's tail swept the sand. His head pressed into Max's chest. The bond felt strong and warm. A faint vibration buzzed in Max's pocket. He rose and lifted his phone. A call came through from Quinn. Her voice carried focus and a thin line of urgency. "Max, we have a case. Another K9 from a closed unit turned up in rough shape. He needs help, the kind you and Louis can give." Max looked down at Louis. The dog stood tall with steady posture. His eyes glowed with readiness. Max gave a slow smile. "Ready for a new mission, old friend?" Louis stepped forward, his tail lifted with calm certainty. The sunrise framed them in bright gold as they turned toward the truck. A new journey waited. The work of healing had no end, and neither of them feared the road ahead.